Well, I got a little short one to share with you today, unless I get caught up and start talking about other things. And I just put a picture of Saturn up there because this is a sort of a little Saturn job that we did, and it was one of those that we kind of didn't expect. Well, I've done some work on Saturns over the years. The first Saturn that I ever saw was when I was working at a Ford dealer. Somebody brought one in, and as I remember on that particular one, and I don't remember what year model it was, you had to just about pull the engine out to change the alternator. It was incredibly dumb the way they had that thing set up. And for years, GM lost money on Saturns, and except for 1995, I think they sold 280,000 of them. And in that particular year, that was the most stolen car in America, was the Saturn automobile in 1995. Other than that, you know, and the other GM divisions got a little miffed with them because a lot of the times the people who had Saturn as their pet project would steal money from other GM motor divisions to prop Saturn up, and so there was a lot of bad blood that went on about that. And there's still some Saturns around here, right around the corner from where I live. There's a lady with a Saturn SUV, and I see them running around all over the place. People just keep driving them, seems to me like. Personally, I've never liked them very much, but, you know, to each his own. Everybody's got their own likes and dislikes. This particular one, the lady brought it in, and she said that occasionally the temperature gauge had fluctuated on it, and she heard a pop under the hood, and she didn't really know what to make of it, and so she decided to quit driving it. She wanted to know if we'd have a look at it and see what was going on. And so I told her, bring it on in, and we'll look at it and see what we can see. And so she brought it in. That's a picture of the car right there in the shop. And the price of the new cars had pushed her to get this low mileage car going again. It's a nice little car if you like Saturns. You know, like I say, I never particularly liked Saturns. Well, this popping under the hood thing was a really peculiar thing. You know, what do you do about something like that? You know, sometimes you'll hear your customer saying that they heard something under the hood, and you're not exactly sure what pocket to put it in. So her dad brings it in on a trailer, and I hooked the jumper to it. She started it up. She drove it into the service bay. Sounded healthy. You know, of course it could. When you just started and it hadn't been running that long, it can sound healthy even if it's not. And that's the deal right there. And so didn't you see any indication of what the pop noise was? The dipstick showed really clean oil. There was enough oil in the coolant, though, that it looked like whipped cream mixed with peanut butter. I don't know if you see anything like that, but it's always great fun when you see that. Some of these diesels that have EGR coolers that rupture will pull a stunt like that. And so my camera lost its ability to focus there for a second. But anyway, that's a picture of what we saw when we took radiators off and all that. And so what could have caused that? Well, it's not too hard to figure out usually. You know, you might remember the Dodge Caravan I was talking about that had coolant, not coolant necessarily, had water in the transmission fluid. And I figured, well, that's going to be the transmission oil cooler. The only problem was on that Dodge Caravan, the transmission oil cooler is external to the radiator. And so that couldn't have been the cause of it. You know, the oil cooler wasn't leaking or anything. They must have gone through some deep water or something, went in through the vent. I don't know. But typically, if you find something like that, you need to be looking for what it did. And I had Identifix for a while. That because I was a school, they were, you know, letting us use it. And then all of a sudden, they wanted me to come up with like $1,300 a year to pay for it. And I said, well, you know, I've got other money, other stuff I need to spend money on, and I can get by without Identifix, you know. But what we did see before we still had Identifix in, we found out there was a lot of oil cooler issues with these things, and that makes all the sense in the world. If the oil cooler is leaking, you know, which is what you'd have on your EGR cooler on your Power Stroke diesels, it would mix oil and coolant, make a big mess out of everything. And so, and that's pretty much, we're going to do some exploratory surgery here. The whole top of the engine had to be pulled off to get this thing out of there, and this is what we found. This is a nice little mucky mess that we had, the oil cooler here. Of course, the thing about it is, just because you got the oil cooler in your hand and you see this mucky mess in here, doesn't necessarily mean that's what the problem is. You're going to need to verify it to make sure that what you're thinking caused the problem, so you're not just slinging a part in there and then find out you got peanut butter in the coolant, you know. Again, well, that right there, that whole, you know, coolant flows around this thing right here. So what we did was, Interestingly, the coolant thermostat is in that same alley, and it's just almost as aggravating to get to as this oil cooler. This is some of the stuff that I never really appreciated about Saturn and the way they made their cars. All right, so that's looking down on the thermostat. You can see this mucky peanut butter stuff in there too. That was really nice. We appreciate that. And so the problems with the oil filter we also had, because we had to pull the oil filter off of there to do this job to get some of the stuff out, because you're having to take stuff loose from all over the place to get the parts off that you need to get off. And so the oil filter had to be removed. Now, of course, you got what you got here is you had this part that was on the block, and there's your filter canister, and then this is basically what that looked like. You had to take a chain wrench and screw that out of there. But the reason that would not, we put this socket on there, and this whole thing was turning, which it's not supposed to do. So we got this chain wrench. So it was it's like a vice grip with bicycle shop chain on it. We had a couple of those over, and we grabbed it with that so we could screw that off of there. And what we found out was these little tangs that are supposed to keep it from turning had broken off. Apparently somebody who had done an oil change on it somehow or another had managed to break those off and just chipped them all up. We didn't cause this. It's just something we discovered while we was there. But we air tested the oil cooler, put some soapy water on it, washed it off real good first with the steam cleaner. Then we put some soapy water on it. We stopped up one side of it and put air pressure in the other side, and we saw all of these bubbles here coming out of the oil cooler. So that was the source of our peanut butter problem right here. And so finally we called a Saturn dealer, and they happened to have one of these oil coolers in stock, and it was $378. And the housing the oil filter housing we bought for $60 from that same dealer. So they had some Saturn parts. There was another Saturn that we worked on. I think I may have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, where we had to take and drill out the lock cylinder on it and replace the lock cylinder. But you remember I told you that when I called the Saturn dealer in Montgomery, Alabama, and I told them I needed to buy a lock cylinder for this car, which would come with a key and all this stuff. And they made me send the owner of the car up there with a birth certificate and a driver's license to prove who they were. They had to have the title of the car with them. They had to prove they owned the car and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's the way it is on a lot of the OEMs now. Won't just let anybody walk in there and buy a key for any car because they're afraid you're going to be stealing the car and all that. One time when I was working at the Ford dealer, it was a heavy rainstorm. And I don't know if somebody had somehow or another got a key to this dump truck or whatever it was. We got a brand new dump truck sitting there. It was back when Ford used to sell these deuce-and-a-half dump trucks and all, before they moved their truck division, got rid of it and sold it to Sterling. But somebody went in there and climbed up in this brand spanking new dump truck. It was pounding rainstorm. I mean, it was raining so hard, one of them hard monsoon rains where you couldn't hardly see anything. And they cranked that dump truck up and drove it right out the gate. And just stole the dump truck. But see, the thing about it is, with that heavy rain falling, nobody wanted to go out there and challenge them and say, where are you going with this dump truck? So basically, they did it in broad daylight while people were working in the shop and everything else. Anyway, it is something I thought of. This special sealer is what what Saturn wanted put on the cover that goes over the oil cooler. When we got the oil cooler in there, we got it all buckled up and tightened up and got the lines connected to it and all that. But we had to put this on the plate. We had to use a caulking gun because the environment's so hostile and the cooler is so hard to access. We didn't want to just put any kind of sealant on there that we figured be aight. We basically put the kind on there that they actually called for, which is a smart way to do that. And there's the cover, and here we are putting this little, using our caulking gun to put that on there just about right. We don't want it, you don't want to put so much of the stuff on there that it squishes out and gets into the oil and goes and clogs something up. That's not a good plan either. So you got to put enough, but not too much. That's really important. How many times have you looked at a place where somebody put a bunch of blue glue all over something and squished out in balls, and then you find it all over the place? It can go, particularly if it's in an automatic transmission situation, you can clog up all kinds of stuff like that. It's always been amazing to me how stuff can manage to get past the filter and do stuff you didn't expect it to do, But one way or another, we put that stuff on there and we buckled it down. I had a girl doing this job, and she was really, really, really careful, had a good mechanical sense about her, real strong. She was able to do problem-solving stuff, you know, like these peculiar, strange E-bolts and Torx head things and all that. You know, she could, and when they were crooked and hard to get to, she was good at figuring out a way to get in there and break those things loose and get them out. She was real strong. We sold her a radiator too. You know, anything that the coolant flows through, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace it. But before we put the new radiator on there, we wanted to go ahead and you know, wash all of as much of that peanut butter out of there as we could. These plastic radiators, and just about anything else that carries hot coolant that's made out of plastic, needs to be replaced fairly regularly anyway. You remember those funky little elbows that went through the belt tensioner on some of the 3.8s and they carried coolant through there? The wackiest thing I've ever seen somebody do that was building a car. But those elbows, they'd be a couple of them elbows going into that belt tensioner on that 3.8 in them Oldsmobiles and some of them other cars. And those things would like to crumble on the end and let the O-ring get out of place and they would leak. Well, some smart aleck got over there at the parts manufacturer, I don't know who it was, Dorman or somebody, came up with some of those to replace the plastic ones with some really nice aluminum ones or some metal ones of some kind. I don't know what they're made of. Aluminum is pretty bad to have electrolysis eat at it, but it seems to me like the ones that I may have seen that were replacement from the plastic ones were indeed aluminum, and they worked really well, and they were less likely. But I had always told that this one lady had a 07 Honda that had a couple 100,000 miles on it, came to me and just wanted to know what I would do to the car in other words, if it was my car and it had that many miles on it, to kind of prevent it from having problems. Is there something you would do? And I said, I'd replace the radiator, because those plastic radiators love to split without warning, and when they do, some of the times you'll wind up burning the motor up before you even knew the radiator split. And I told you about that Toyota, 93 Toyota Camry a while back that splits a radiator because it was kind of high mileage. I've seen Cadillacs that I'd stop and help people sitting beside the road, and the radiator had split unexpectedly, that plastic radiator tank. Something else that these things do, and my Explorer did this, the radiator would leak in that rubber seal where the plastic tanks and the core is put together. And so I got a aftermarket radiator to put in there, and it started leaking after a real short period of time from the rubber seals between them. And then there was another one, and it started leaking too. And finally I raised enough cane with the part supplier to where he went ahead and let me pay the difference and got a brand new Ford one, and we put it in there, and that's the one that's in there now, and it hadn't started leaking again. Of course, the original one was old. I mean, it was an 06 vehicle, and when my wife passed it down to me, and when she bought her new pickup truck, it only had like 20,000 miles on it since 2006. So, age does things too. The good thing about it is that thing had so much coolant going through there that what had happened was the coolant is really, really clean, and there's no rust at all. When people don't change their coolant like they should, coolant changes are really, really important, because if you don't, you wind up... How many times have you seen these rusty, eat-up rusty blocks with coolant in there that look like mud and stuff like that? I had a Ford Tempo one time that this lady brought in there, and you might remember some of the Fords in the early 80s didn't have a check engine light on them. They had a red engine light that would come on if the oil pressure or the temperature got out of range. In other words, they didn't tell you what was going on, but that red engine light came on. It's important. And she came in, and the story that she told about her Tempo was, she said that that light would come on and it would stop running, and then she would sit there for a little while, then she'd crank it up and she'd go on. And she had taken it to a dealership somewhere down in the north part of Florida, because she was apparently commuting in that area. And they told her just not to worry about that light. Apparently they thought it was like a check engine light. It wasn't a dealership, it was another kind of shop, for the dealership would have probably known better, unless it's an old car, and sometimes they don't. But long and short of it is, she came to the Ford dealer where I was working, And she said, this light has been, and I said, how long has it been doing this? She said, for about a month. Ever so often, the red light will come on, it'll stop. And when I looked at that thing, somebody had just put clear water in the radiator, and with no antifreeze, and it had just turned everything that was in that thing was rusty mud that didn't have any real coolant or very little liquid in there. And so we basically either replaced the radiator or cleaned it, drained it, flushed the block. When I took the thermostat out of there, that thermostat had literally been so hot, I kid you not, that thermostat had been so hot that it turned gunmetal blue. It had blued it got so hot. And I washed all of that stuff out of there, and I put fresh antifreeze in it and all that. And it had that little 2.3 liter house world combustion 4-cylinder in it. It was a pretty tough little motor. It had a camshaft in the block. It was like half of a V8, you know. And what totally astonished me was that that car had been so hot that it had quit running probably 20 or 30 times. And when I fired it back up, it didn't smoke. It didn't blow a gasket. It just seems totally impossible to me for any motor to be hot as many times as that one was and still keep on ticking, but that one did. I don't know, you know, what happens when everything comes together just the right way and one manages to take more punishment, and it seems like any piece of machinery could. You could take one of those Chevy engines in that same vintage and get it hot one time and the head's destroyed or warped, you know, and you wind up with all kinds of compression in the water jacket and all that. Well, the new thermostat was a no-brainer. As much trouble as this one was to get to, we figured while we got the top off, we'll pop the thermostat. That's where it was right there, and whenever that manifold's on there, you can't hardly get to it. So we went ahead and got a thermostat. You know, it comes like that, and we put that in there. We poured hot water and dishwashing soap in the thermostat housing before we ever put the radiator on it, and caught all of that stuff in a great big pan, and then we go empty it out in the steam cleaner drain and all that. And you know, I don't know about you, but if one's got a lot of rust in the block, or if it's got a lot of this kind of crud in it, you can wash and wash and wash and try and try and try, and you're never going to get it as clean as a brand new vehicle again, unless you pull the motor out, totally rip it all to shreds and run it through a vat. I mean, you can do that and you can get it cleaned up, but when it's in the car and you're just trying to do the best you can, you just got to do the best you can. You know, like some of those V6 Pontiacs and stuff, that 3.1, whatever it was, is a 3.4, 3.1, 2.8 package, you know, that engine there had a tendency to blow intake gaskets and get a whole bunch of water and oil. And it was really aggravating to have to deal with all that, because you really kind of wanted to get all that stuff out of there. But the more you disturb when you're in there, the more likely you are to have a situation where your sludge gets down in the bottom. I was doing it on a Zoom call, talking to a bunch of instructors in Canada about a course I had developed for, you know, for them. And we were talking briefly, and they said in Canada, where it's really cold, and some of you guys are probably aware of this, if an engine is running too cold, or if it makes little short runs and all, what it'll do is it gathers water in the crankcase to the point where it puddles in the bottom, and this is condensation. You know, you make a gallon of water for every gallon of fuel you burn, and that blow by, if you don't give a chance to get it warm enough where the PCV can process it, that water starts gathering in the crankcase and turning into sludge, but a lot of times it settles in the bottom of the pan. Up in Canada, where it gets cold enough, what will happen is that water will freeze overnight, and you'll go out there and you'll start it up, and it won't be able to get any oil because it's got ice in the oil pickup, and it destroys the engine because somebody ran it short distances or ran it too cold and had a whole bunch of water that gathered in the bottom of the oil pan. You know, it's not any kind of, we don't have that kind of problem in the deep south. Now, the water in the oil is still bad, the sludge is bad, but they've got problems, you know, in those northern climes up there, even in the northern states in the United States, with all of this rusty crud because of the salt on the roads. And every now and then we would get one that would come from up there we'd have to work on. And you guys that are used to working on all that rusty stuff up there are like, ha ha ha, this is no big deal. There was when I was living in Port Arthur, Texas, I went by this transmission shop where a friend of mine worked, and he was working on a truck he had to pull a transmission out of that was, it was a work truck on the coke dock over there, and this thing had coal dust about an inch thick all over the place underneath the truck, and every time he got ready to take a bolt off, like we're cross members, he'd have to take an air hammer and chisel the coal dust away from that bolt. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with. Of course, you know, we have muddy roads down here and that kind of stuff, but we don't have a whole lot of rust. And so, anyway, so we ran that stuff through there and we got it all cleaned out. The worst mistake you can make, though, is to send one out with a problem you didn't catch, like another leak or an intermittently operating cooling fan. If you've got one that's overheating and you fix the overheating problem, in other words, if you put a head gasket or whatever else needed to be done because it overheated, if you ignore the fact that the cooling fan may have been what caused it. You know, cooling fans can work and then not work, work and then not work. We've talked about the dark commutator strips and all that. Once again, you trust but verify. Don't assume you're done. We weren't. With the new radiator in place, along with the new thermostat, and with the hose clamps tight, but with the manifold still out of the way, we pressure tested the cooling system and found the water pump was leaking in a big way. And the oil that got into the coolant had obviously attacked that seal on the water pump, and was, you know, the seal had changed and got all fat and everything. And I was watching that thing to see if I got out of focus. Anyway, it had to have a water pump. Well, it's a piece of cake, right? Well, look here. Well, look at all the stuff you got to do that. You pull all that off. You're supposed to take that off. You're supposed to support the engine with that thing. You're supposed to take your belts off and all that. Obviously, you got to do that on any of them. And then you got to pull this off. And then you got to pull the cover off. And you get down to the water pump. Piece of cake, right? You know, that was a booger bear. But we put a water pump on it and managed to wash a little more stuff out of there while we were in there, you know. But with a new water pump in place, the manifold installed, fresh engine oil, 30 minutes of leading the cooling system. We made sure it was wet. One of the things I always had to teach my students is filling up a cooling system on a vehicle is not like pouring water in a bucket. Now, granted, if the thermostat's on the bottom hose, you can take the top hose loose and you can work most of the air out of there beforehand. But you got to be really careful to make sure it's not airbound somehow, because they'll really surprise you how they can get airbound when you don't think they could. Always make sure the cooling system's full and make sure the fan is working every single time. It needs to come on and off. If it comes on and heats up and goes off, comes on, warms up, goes off, you can tell. You can also watch the coolant temperature and make sure the thermostat's working too, if you pay attention to how the coolant fluctuates. And all that, if you know when the thermostat opens. Coolant fan cycles, the reservoir's full, the heater's blowing warm air, everything's okay. Well, she came back a few days later, like they do sometimes. She says, you know, I wasn't having any of this trouble before, but I'm hearing a whistling noise now. And it turned out that this header pipe gasket was the problem, and it was like that before we worked on it because we didn't take that header pipe loose. And she was just trying to, you know, people try to guilt you into fixing something, you know, that like they'll come back and say, well, it wasn't like that before. It was funny as all get out. The guy that drove this 92 Taurus station wagon that the dealership used for dealer transfers, he was always hauling these car salesmen to Mobile and Pensacola and other places like that to bring back cars that they had dealer transferred from other dealers. You know, people have one that wanted to outfit it a certain way, and they'd call the dealership down, oh yeah, we got one like that, the right color and everything, so they'd send them down there to get it and drive it back. And so Buck, the guy that drove that 92 Taurus, he had been driving it since it was a brand new car, and it had 360 some odd thousand miles on that car, and it still ran like a brand new car. And the dealership just eventually gave it to him because it had so many miles on it. In their mind, it wasn't worth anything. But one day, while he was still using it for dealer transfers, he came in there and he wanted some wiper blades. And I said, okay, you know, you got to remember this car is really old and it's got a lot of miles on it. There's a lot of road that's going under those wheels, you know, and it's had who knows how many set of tires on it. Anyway, I put the wiper blades on there, and then he comes back and he says, this wiper motor is making noise, and it wasn't making noise before you put them wiper blades on there. Well, the doggone wiper motor was worn out, and he you know, he was trying to tie any way you can get the work that somebody did and connect it to something else that's wrong. This guy didn't even own the car. That was just totally amazing to me how he had that mindset. You know, when you put them wiper blades on, you must have done something wrong because now the wiper motor is noisy. Really? Give me a break. All right. What's this? Wild card question. You ever seen pliers like that before? Some of you guys may know what these are, some of you may not. But these were on the tool truck for a long time, and the tool truck guy could not sell them. I think it was the Mac tool man, if I remember right. Nobody would buy them, and he had them on his truck for a long time. And I was out there talking to him one day. I bought, some school tools from him, and he just gave these to me. You can have this set of pliers. These actually are a match set. And you might notice this right here. It's got a little sort of a housetop shape on it, and this little jaw that goes against it. And that one there is just basically got some regular jaw. This is what it's for, taking that thing off and putting it back on. I don't know if you've seen a pair of those before. You may have some in your toolbox. You may have used them for years and years and years, doing brakes ever since the 70s. I would use 2 screwdrivers to pry this apart and get it off of there and then put it back on. Just use a regular pair of pliers and squeeze it together. All right, so you ever seen one of these before? This is made by Snap-on Tools. You might notice over here. Then it's got a teeny tiny saw blade right there, and it's got this special setup right here. It has a specific purpose. I don't know what that thing cost. I could probably zoom in and get the part number off that thing and pull up a picture of it. But this would spin, and it had a job, and what it was supposed to do was clean these little grooves, these commutator grooves between these strips. When I was working at the gas station in the 70s, when we pulled a starter off, and we rebuilt a lot of starters, we would actually saw those, or we generators too, but starters particularly, that had commutator strips. The guy that ran the station would have me get a little skinny hacksaw blade and put that armature in the vise up there, take it out of the starter, and saw in between those and get those things cleaned out. I don't think that really made all that much of a difference. But from back in the day, whenever they used this little saw, and you would clamp that thing in there, and you could actually move this, and it would go, and you could just cut those little things out. Pretty darn cool, I thought. Anyway, everybody needs a mechanic sooner or later. Somebody that doesn't need a mechanic or claims they don't need a mechanic is either buying a new car every year, which you lose a lot of money like that, always have, or they're just not being honest, because a mechanic doesn't usually need any mechanic but himself, but he still needs one, because every vehicle needs some kind of work done on it sooner or later. But that's about all I got for you today. I just wanted to run this little job by you guys and have a little fun. And I'll see you fellas next time, and I appreciate you watching.